You referenced the age of authenticity in your lecture today, and about the youth and the youth workers sometimes also their desire to find something that is uniquely them. Can you say more about the implications of this cultural shift and how that is different from previous trends and what this all means for youth ministry?
Yeah, and it's been an idea I've been kind of working on for a while, and it's not my own idea. This kind of living in an age of authenticity, or what's sometimes been called the ethic of authenticity, is a thought that comes from Charles Taylor, which has been a dialogue partner I've had for a while now. And so there's a yellow book. This is in the ugly plug of this interview. There's a yellow book that's volume 1 of Ministry in a Secular Age, called Faith Formation in a Secular Age, which really tries to dig into the age of authenticity. But this next book that's called The End of Youth Ministry, is really picks up some of those themes. And in many ways is the practical side. I want to be careful in saying practical, because if anyone's read any of my stuff, they know it's practical is not the best adjective for it, but it's more directly the working out of some of those ideas of the age of authenticity. So the age of authenticity, Taylor thinks, is a post-60s reality. So he thinks it's been filtering in within us after really the Cultural Revolution of the 68 and 69, and it's just kind of come in ebbs and flows. So before that, he says we were living in what he calls the age of mobilization. Okay. And what he means by the age of mobilization is you have to kind of think of that as coming after what he calls, this is like Russian dolls, what he calls,
one inside the other.
One inside the other. And it actually kind of functions that way, is that it comes after the ancient regime. So after what comes after the age of kings and queens is this age of mobilization, which the best way to actually think about it, not to be kind of culturally centric, but America is a good way to think about it, where the revolution in America was, as much as it was pushing King George's taxation away, it was saying that we can mobilize our own way of life, that we the people, that just for a king or a queen, the way heaven is structured is supposed to be the way your domain is structured. So just as God sits on God's throne, so the king or queen sits on his throne. And now the American Revolution, and then the French Revolution, and then it filters across the West particularly. No, it doesn't function that way. I mean, we still maybe want to grab God's laws and read our scripture. Maybe some of us do. But we, the people, can decide which kind of order we live in. So it's about mobilized life. I think what's interesting about that is denominational Christianity is Christianity for an age of mobilization. So it really is about us mobilizing ourselves as Presbyterians or as UCC or as Lutherans, that we have to mobilize that. But that puts a certain existential crisis upon the denomination. And that existential crisis is if the next generation does not decide to mobilize their lives, say, as Lutherans or Presbyterians, there is no Lutheran and Presbyterian denomination, or there is no ELCA, there is no PCUSA.
Right.
So one of my skepticisms is youth ministries become so important because as we move more into an age of authenticity, and the age of mobilization has not been as much of a driving force, and a new kind of way of thinking about ourselves arises, the denomination doesn't know what to do with that. And so all of a sudden there's a crisis where in an age of authenticity, you only follow what speaks to you. That's the authority structure. So just because other generations did this and mobilized their lives that way, where maybe in 1940 a young person would say, well, the UCC was good enough for my grandfather, it's good enough for me.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen now.
Sure.
Because now you have to find your own unique way of being.
Yeah.
Well, if everyone finds their own unique way of being by not being part of the ELCA and 1995 or in 2015, there is no ELCA in a generation. So the denomination can only exist for a generation, and it needs another generation to enact their lives that way, or it doesn't exist.
Sure.
But when you're in an age of authenticity, which says you should only follow what speaks to you, and that every human being has a right to define for themselves what it means to be human, well, now you're at a point of crisis. So skeptically, I sometimes wonder if youth ministry has been funded and even thrust forward, not because we're really interested in the theological construction that can happen there, not even because we really truly believe that praying for and being prayed for by young people is an essential dynamic of the mystery of faith or something, but because we know intuitively know that our denominations will sink without this. So then youth ministry becomes a kind of painted, glossy, authentic form to try to draw the next generation into mobilizing their life this way.
Right.
But then that becomes inherently contradiction and becomes kind of a problem.
Sure.
So,
and let's perpetuate the story a little bit where it's not just denominations. We're looking at Christianity as a whole, and there are a lot of youth groups that are starting to sort of remember the importance of Jesus, whereas the Christian story has been put to the side oftentimes for the sake of welcoming youth and giving them that safe space and helping them find that sense of identity and who they are. But it's often it comes from what you talked about in your lecture of a 1960s model where it's let's bring everyone in and be safe and give them fun and be a kid again. Now we're sort of in an interesting shift. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, we are in a very interesting shift. And we're in one of the reasons we're in such an interesting shift, I think, is because it's really easy, and as that yellow book, Faith Formation of Secular Age, has been out, that some people have read it, and maybe I was a little bit too harsh on the age of authenticity as being kind of a negative thing, as being there's an excess within it, and there is legitimately an excess within it, and you only have to spend some time on Twitter and Instagram to see the excesses of the age of authenticity. But Taylor, and if I can be so bold myself, believe the age of authenticity is a good thing. It's very good that people get to define for themselves what it means to be human. It opens us up to all sorts of other experiences that people are having that are core to their own narrative and their own story of who they are that used to be pushed to the side or say those aren't allowed to be spoken here. We now have a space for that. The conundrum it puts us in is we do not know what it means. I mean, it sounds a little bit too grandiose, but what it means to have communities of faith inside of, and even how to fund those and how to support those institutionally inside of the age of authenticity. So we're in a time where we're kind of stuck between. Like all of our institutional structures are age of mobilization, but what drives us, what forms our imaginations, what we think is good is authenticity. And so then we end up where we kind of are culturally now, where it's like anything that smells of the old mobilization from one group is bad. And then for the other group who's still saying, well, no, there's still something good there. They then look at these people who said that and say, well, they're just bad. And so you can see, I mean, it's more complicated than that, but it can lead to those collisions. But it becomes really hard, I think, often for the youth worker because you really are kind of stuck needing the institution to even get a paycheck, that it that it regenerate itself, mobilize itself in such a way, but also know that your young people are making all sorts of meaning and forming their identity, and what holds authority for them is not that the bishop said this or that in 1945 there was a confession that said this, which I don't even know what a 45 confession would be, but just go with me. I pulled that number out of my head. So that becomes a big issue for us, I think.
Sure, thanks.